Hello and welcome everyone to the daily news analysis of 24th of November 2023। तो इम्पोर्टेंट आर्टिकल जो है गवर्नर होल्ड्स नो वीटो पावर ओवर बिल्स सेज सुप्रीम कोर्ट। ये पहला आर्टिकल हो गया। देन एंड ऑफ सीक्रेसी डिसेप्टिव सिग्नल्स ए 5 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी बट फॉर होम। COP 28 India's equity demand। MGNREGS audit crosses 50% local bodies in just 6 states। Fatima Bibi, first woman judge in Supreme Court, dead। Need a regulator like SEBI for AI। L&T Financing Science financing pact with ADB Asian Development Bank for $125 million to support rural borrowers। तो पहला जो है गवर्नर होल्ड्स नो वीटो पावर ओवर बिल्स सेज सुप्रीम कोर्ट। The Supreme Court has laid down the law that a governor, in case he withholds assent to a bill, should send it back to the state legislature as soon as possible with a message to reconsider the proposed law. If the Assembly reiterates the bill with or without amendments, the governor has no choice or discretion and has to give his assent to it. Now, the November 10 judgment released on Thursday was based on a petition filed by the Punjab government against its governor's action to hold back crucial bills. The verdict would be a significant boost to Tamil Nadu's case. The Tamil Nadu Assembly had returned 10 crucial bills to Governor R.N. Ravi, who had withheld assent in the first instance. The substantive part of Article 200 empowers the governor to withhold assent to the bill. In such an event, the governor must mandatorily follow the course of action which is indicated in the first proviso of communicating to the state legislature as soon as possible a message warranting the reconsideration of the bill, a three-judge bench headed by Chief Justice of India D.Y. Chandrachud held. Ultimate authority. The ultimate decision on whether or not to accept the advice of governor as contained in the message belongs to the legislature alone. That the message of the governor does not bind to legislature is evident from the use of the expression if the bill is passed again with or without amendments, the bench held. The court held that a governor who chooses to withhold a bill without doing anything further would be acting in contraventions of the constitution. The governor, as the unelected head of the state, would be in a position to virtually veto the functioning of the legislature domain by a duly elected legislature by simply declaring that assent is withheld without any further recourse. Such a course of action would be contrary to fundamental principle of a constitutional democracy based on a parliamentary pattern of governance, the court held. The court held that the bill should be sent back to the legislature as soon as possible with the mandatory message. It is said the expression as soon as possible conveyed a constitutional imperative of expeditions. Failure to take a call and keeping a bill duly passed for intermediate periods is a course of action inconsistent with that expression. Constitutional language is not surpluses, says Chief Justice of India wrote in 27-page judgment. The second article editorial का जो है end of secrecy। India must respond meaningfully to allegations against its agents. India's decision to resume e-visas for Canadian citizens worldwide is a significant step towards restoring travel ties with Canada, which were snapped in September during the diplomatic standoff following Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's allegation that Indian government agents had masterminded the assassination of a Khalistani leader, while India had restored certain categories of the visa last month. E-visa and tourist visa remained under suspension due to the threat to Indian diplomat from Khalistani groups. According to the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, the restoration of visas for Canadian was due to the situation becoming more secure. However, the step does not necessarily mean a restoration of normal ties after India cancelled visas for Canadians and demanded that Canada cut down its diplomatic strength by two-thirds for the parity purpose. Canada had flown out more than 40 of its diplomats and their family members to and reduced its visa issuance capacity as well. With travel visa curtailed on both sides, business and investment ties to suffered, especially as Canada has had already suspended talks for a free trade agreement after the killing of Khalistani leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar. While Mr. Jaishankar and the Canadian Foreign Minister met each other in US in September, political ties have virtually shut down. In addition, a new controversy sparked by Washington has emerged over a report that Indian government agencies were plotting to target another Khalistani leader, Sikh for Justice leader Gurpatwant Singh Pannon in the US like Niger. Pannon, a US-Canadian dual national, is wanted in India for inciting violence against Indians and Indian diplomats and for recently issuing a warning to travelers not to take Air India fighters after November 19. This menacing statement harks back to the bombing of Air India Flight 182 out of Montreal, which killed all 329 on board. In 1985, a White House statement confirmed the news reports that US official has raised the issue during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Washington in June. This indicates that the issue over Khalistani separatists is far from dying down, despite a New Delhi conversation with Western partners at the 2+2 dialogue with the US and Australia, respectively, and Mr. Jaishankar's recent visit to the UK. In sharp contrast to the recent past, the government, which had rejected the Canadian allegation as absurd and motivated, has been surprisingly accommodating of the US allegation. The External Affairs Ministry you issued a statement that said India is examining the US imports and would take necessary follow-up actions. While these are no matter of national security, it is time the government so said some of the secrecy surrounding its dual responses and crafted its future course of action more coherently. The next is deceptive signals. Last month, India's goods exports recorded on their second uptick this financial year with a 6.2% rise. Merchandise imports grew a sharper 12.3% over last October and nearly 21% over September, tally to hit an all-time high of $65.03 billion. The trade deficit as a result also hit a record $31.5 billion. The import bill was expected to go beyond the relatively tepid trends in recent months, spurred by anticipation of festive demands for items such as jewelry and high-end electronics. But this surge and the deficit tally was beyond expectation, with economists describing it as a rude shock. Thanks to idiosyncratic effects, the Finance Ministry's monthly economic review asserted that merchandise merchandise exports surprised on the outside with the highest growth in 11 months, and that exports and imports have grown despite fears of weak global demand. The high imports and the likely deficit trajectory need not trigger much anxiety yet. The recent decline in oil price should help this inelastic import bill receded from the 7-month high of $17.7 billion, while festive and wedding demand spiked. Gold and silver imports to an extent. Price drops in precious metals in early October also played a role as the jewelers sought to ramp up stocks before prices rebounded. Similarly, not all the bump up in electronics import can be construed as consumption demand. That October was the last month of pre-imports of personal computers, laptops, and servers before the deferred implementation of new import licensing norms. Now euphemistically rephased as an import management system also triggered players into stockpiling inventories of these items. The government has been trying to rein in the import bill through such measures and a slew of quantity control orders, but boosting exports is more critical to support job creation and economic growth. What is worrying is October's headline uptick is exports is a statistical kink. The shipment value of $33.6 billion is actually the lowest in 12 months and 6% below in the 2021 tally. Global trade grew 2% month on month in October, but India exports dropped 2.6%. This is a clear sign that incremental opportunities that a slowing world is throwing up are being lost out on. The next a 5 trillion economy, but for whom? Last weekend, at an election rally in Chhattisgarh, Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced that he is extending the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, a scheme providing 5 kg of food grain free every month to beneficiaries of National Food Security Act by 5 years because he does not want any citizen to sleep hungry. This means that 8 crore Indians will still be receiving free food grains to stave off hunger in 2028. This is the year the government expects India to become the third largest economy in the world with a GDP of $5 trillion. With large swaths of Indians still be hungry with a GDP of 5 trillion, who will benefit from the 5-year dash to these targets? The story of Japan's growth. For reference, let's take a look at Japan today. The third largest economy by GDP in the world, in Japan there is reportedly a death by suicide every 20 minutes. About 15 lakh Japanese have not left their homes for years, a form of severe social withdrawal known as hikikomori. Old parents rent actresses who come in on Sunday to call them mom and pop because their own daughters do not visit anymore. Every day, dead people are discovered in tiny apartment days or weeks after they died. These are called kudukushi or a lonely death. Clearly, Japan's climb to the third position economy-wise has not lifted all boats equally. It has tossed the weak to the margins where they languish because economic growth on steroids has obstructed the safety cash of family and community ties. For 40 years, Japan was the world's second largest economy powered by manufacturing and exports. But after the 2008 world financial crisis, the wheels came off the Japanese economy. Japan's population started spending less, exports shrank, and government initiatives dried up. On the other hand, Chinese enjoyed a manufacturing boom and dislodged Japan to become the world's second largest economy by GDP. On losing rank, however, Japan displayed a remarkable ego-free economic diplomacy as soon as the economy plunged to the third position. Japan's leadership publicly welcomed China's ascent, stating that sustained demand from the then most populous country would only be good for Japan's export. Even if this statement was made partially to save face. The two economies intervened immediately. Today, China is Japan's largest trading partner, providing that India in the world political economy. It pays to embrace your main competitor, even if you are Vishwaguru, global teacher. This ego-free activism has ensured that Japan has held on to the third position in the world GDP ranking for the last 14 years. But let us return to the parallel story in Japan. As the high value industrial economy took center stage, the strength of a personal and professional relationship withered, and the multi gravitational family and social structure became atomized. This was a perfect storm in the lives of the traditional semi-skilled workforce. Workers moved from the countryside and satellite towns to cities, expecting salaryman jobs, but many discovered that they were not trained for the technological tsunami sweeping the high growth sector. They fell through the cracks into the financial collapse and social withdrawals. A deep divide. Today, the government of India claims that the country is on the course of an economic tsunami. How does the sprint to the target of 5 trillion dollar board for citizens, especially the 8 crore who will still be on free ration in 2028? India's economic growth pivot on capital productivity and labor, and data show that for over four-fifths of Indians, the 5 trillion economy is a bridge too far. Consider capital. In 2021, 1% of the population owned about 41% of their nation's wealth, while 50% owned 3% of its wealth, according to Oxfam. In such an environment, the dash towards a 5 trillion economy trophy lies in the grip of the resource-rich brokers who will seize the initiative. But ironically, it is the low-resource citizens who are funding the investment for the proposed 5 trillion economy. Approximately 64% of the total goods and service tax came from the bottom 50% of the population, and top 10% contributed 3% of GST. At the same time, the contribution of labor, the other driver of growth, is hamstrung due to dubious educational and skill attainments and halting digital literacy. Productivity is just beginning to get a boost through the creation of a digital and physical infrastructure. The government is aware that the rich are moving into pole position to deliver the 5 trillion economy target just before the 2029 general election. Clearly, this will booster upscale the India's influence and power aboard and Prime Minister's primacy in the world. The government's tool and sectors for achieving these goals were identified by the Minister of State for Finance Pankaj Chaudhary in Parliament on August 2023 as digital economy, fintech, energy transition, climate change, GST insolvency, and bankruptcy code decrease in the corporate tax, make in India, startup India, production linked incentives, all prepared by the mandatory mantras include inclusive growth, but these cutting-edge sector and tools are not native to the 80 crore marginalized citizen and to and to crores of others. They cannot seize the opportunity of foreign artificial intelligence or data science or robotics or fintech either now or in the next 5 years. There are also other issues. Mr. Modi's guarantee that India will be the third largest economy in the 5 years. First, with a per capita income of 2000 $2,400, India's rank 149 among 194 countries in 2022. Since per capita income is a key index of the population well-being, note that the average Japanese at $34,000 is considered better off than average Chinese at a $13,000, even though China has outstripped Japan in world GDP ranking. What is the India's per capita income projected to be at 5 trillion economy? There is no official estimates available. Second, the knob of the chase to 5 trillion economy is in its distribution or inequality index. This index generated by World Economic is on a scale of 0 to 100. A high value indicates a more egalitarian society. The value of both China and Japan are more than 50. These countries appear to be sharing their economic fortunes more evenly than India, which has a value of 21.9 with the $5 trillion target. India might be on its way to achieving this goal, but most of the population still remains marooned in the slow lanes of the older India, watching as the new caravans storm past. Then COP 2080, India's equity demand. There is an almost linear relationship between global warming and cumulative carbon dioxide emission. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change (UNFCCC) in 1992 noted that per capita emission in developing countries are still relatively low, and their share in the global emission will grow to meet their social and developmental needs. The convention recognizes the common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities principle. This means different states have different responsibilities and respective capabilities in tackling climate change. This principle has been reaffirmed in Paris Agreement, whose main aim is to hold the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level, and pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 6 Assessment Report IPCCAR6, every 1000 billion tons of CO2 is in emissions causes an estimated 0.45 degrees centigrade Celsius rises in the global surface temperature. Axiomatically, limiting the rise in global temperature to a specific levels means limiting cumulative carbon dioxide emissions to within a carbon budget. What is the global carbon budget? The term global carbon budget refers to maximum cumulative global anthropogenic CO2 emission from the pre-industrial era to when such emissions reach net zero, resulting in limiting global warming to a given level with a given probability. The remaining carbon budget indicates how much CO2 could still be emitted emitted from a specified time after the pre-industrial period while keeping temperature rise to the specified limit. The IPCCAR6 has shown that the world warmed by the staggering 1.07 degrees Celsius until 2019 from pre-industrial levels, so almost four-fifths of global carbon budgets stand depleted. Only a fifth remains to meet the target set in Paris Agreement. For a 50% chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, the US would have to reach net zero in 2025 rather than 2050. Germany by 2030 instead of 2045, and European Union 28 bloc by 2031 instead of 2050. Who is responsible for cumulative global emission? According to the IPCCAR6, the developed countries has appropriated a disproportionately larger share of the global carbon budget to date. The contribution of South Asia, which includes India, a historical cumulative emission is only around 4% despite having almost 24% of the entire world population. The per capita CO2 FFI fossil fuel and industry emission of South Asia was just 1.7 tons CO2 equivalent per capita, far below North America 15.4 tons CO2 equivalent per capita, and also significantly lower than the world average 6.6 tons CO2 EQ per capita. How does the carbon budget matter for India? The global carbon budget for a given temperature limit is a global resource common to the entire world but is exhaustible and limited, and with only equitable method of sharing it consistent with the foundation principles of the UNFCCC. India must recognize a fair share of the carbon budget as a strategic national resource whose reserves are depleting rapidly due to overexploitation by the developed countries. In a rapid depleting global carbon budget, if we fail to deploy resources at our command to forcefully use it as a strategic national resources, we will be shortchanged by new colonial techniques of the developed countries in almost all the emission scenarios estimated by the IPCC. The world reaches an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels in the early 2030s. In 2022, oil, coal, and gas accounted for 30%, 27%, 23% of the world's total energy, while solar and wind energy together contributed to only 2.4%. The world is still largely powered by non-renewable energy. Developed countries have tried to beat developing countries into accepting rapid economic wide changes. At the COP26 talks in Glasgow, they forced the issue of phasing down the use of coal, but then backtracked by reopening coal plants across Europe after the Russia-Ukraine war created an energy crisis. This has illustrated that the immediate phase out of fossil fuel infeasible in the face of shocks and also limits developing countries access to their room to grow. The developed countries have stretched the argument further by calling gas green and a bridge fuel towards their own decarbonization efforts. What should India's stance be at the COP28? According to Niti Aayog, UN Development Program Multidimensional Poverty Index Report 2023 review, India has been able to lift more than 135 million poor out of poverty in less than 5 years. 2015-21, India has also just extended food security welfare measures to more than 800 million people in the country under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana PMGKAY, highlighting the magnitude of the challenge of poverty eradication after COVID-19. Development is the fast defense against climate change. How long will developing countries have to divert their scarce resources, manpower, and attention to meeting global problems created by developed countries? Until developed countries themselves undertake mitigation efforts in their own backyard, the exercise will be hogwash. It is imperative that developing countries receive a fair and equitable share of their carbon budget alongside stronger and more fruitful commitments from developed countries, including the promised but unmet climate specific new and traditional finance. The Indian government has led from the front to foster international consensus to tackle climate change. To this end, India has set up the International Solar Alliance, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, and the Global Biofuel Alliance. Through the Lifestyle for Environment (LIFE) mission, the Indian government also aims to spread awareness of good lifestyle practices and establish the sustainable lifestyle are the best way forward at the COP28. India must demand a fair share of its carbon budget of or equivalent repartition to bring about fairness within the global order. Only development brings with it an assurance to tide over the roller coaster on for climate change. Scientists estimate that at a conservative price of 50 $50 per TCO2 equivalent, developed countries' carbon debt to the world is pegged at over $51 trillion. Based on the Indian historical emission 1850-2019, it has a carbon credit equivalent of 338 GTCO2 equivalent equal to around $17 trillion at 50 by TCO2 EQ without finance and technology, and promised in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit developing countries stare at an even more unfair world. Thus, cover decision of Glasgow Climate Pact recorded on an unprecedented regret on the failure of the developed countries to provide $100 billion a year, as promised at the COP15 talks in the Copenhagen in 2009. We need more finance and less rhetoric from developed countries. For far too long, developed countries have had a free pass, and it is time for a new India to take them on. A deepfake alarm challenges challenges as AI shadow looms over the entertainment industry. Age has always been the case with the anti-technology development. Most common discussion around artificial intelligence center on the direct perceivable pros and cons it poses. Thanks to science sci-fi favorite plot of robots taking over all humanity. It takes an unfortunate scapegoat to force us out of our voluntary or involuntary ignorance. Look at everything that lies beyond and acknowledge the gaping divide between those who are willing and not willing to participate in AI related discussions. Earlier this month, a deepfake a video featuring a human whose appearance was digitally altered using AI tech, sur- surfaced, featuring Rashmika Mandana's facial likeness morphed over that British Indian social media personality Zara Patel. While those familiar with deepfakes could spot its earnest immediately, Rasmika's pan-India popularity, the fact that she was the first Indian actor to voice out against the deepfake abuse, and that it got even the Prime Minister voicing out his concerns attached colossal media attention. This only silver lining in the controversy that erupted is that it has demanded that social media users from India pay attention to the global conversation on both AI as well as the regulation of the use of the tech in the hands of humans. For most of us, the allure of AI application has certainly made scrolling through social media a fascinating exercise. Who would have even thought one could listen to Pongamal Bandhal in the voice of PM Narendra Modi? It is Rajnikant and Silk Smita came alive in a video tribute, and in quite an airy incident we heard a Rajni song by the late SP Balasubramaniam. What grabbed the most eyeballs was a deepfake video of the Kavalya Kavala song from Jailer that had Tamanna Bhatia's face swapped with that of Simran. Both the female stars were overcome with joy, but if you were wondering why we were largely made aware of AI through entertainment media, Simran remind us that it has always been the case. I believe it's one way it seems the creator of AI are letting the world know of their presence, she says. But there is a vital high risk aspects of the deep tech that makes systems established to tackle existing cybercrimes like morphing and revenge porns. The sadly normalized forms of cyber attacks that female public personalities are often subjected to seem redundant because the threat is no longer just a photo being moved onto another photograph or a consensual upload of demeaning private media. What we are discussing is also the product of generative AI that can create something new, almost perfect rendition with what it has been fed. The baffling rate at which generative AI is advancing make the Rasmika controversy seem almost mild in comparison to what the future hold awareness and vigilance. What we are discussing is a minute aspect in a gamut of AI misuse of generative AI by humans for personal attacks. The Indian government has been vigilant in implementing measures to tackle AI related issues since before the term became a parlance, and measures combating dark AI are being developed every milestone globally. But what resolution exists for victims of deepfake currently in India? Say a deepfake video featuring your digital likeness was released online. The first step pundits advise you to do is to report the post to the social media platform. What are legally bound or bound to not only address grievances relating to cybercrime but specifically in the case remove it within 36 hours. Ashwini Vaishnav, the Union Minister for Electronics and Information Technology and Communication, held a high-level meeting with social media platform and professor pioneering in AI to discuss measures to tackle deepfakes. The wait for proper legislation that directly addresses deepfakes and AI-related crimes is awaited, but meanwhile, the internet and law enthusiasts are happy to help you in guiding you with legal recourse. They say it's best for a victim to lodge a complaint with the National Cybercrime Helpline 1930, avail the service of a good cyber lawyer who would explain the many provision of Section 66 of Information Technology Act of 2000, the Copyright Act, and other provision under the Indian Penal Code that can provide legal remedies if the nature of the deepfake of or any morbid picture is intimated, or even if any intimate image was posed without consent. Victims can avail help at the online forums Stop Sales organized ORG, which also promises to safeguard privacy. But is there anything else that can be done to prevent such content from reaching on our consumers? Imagine what would happen to WhatsApp University if, like WhatsApp, like Facebook and X, fact checks tools. Such social platforms could help sort through AI content. It might be possible for the source, but source post. But what about the media files that are duplicated and forwarded? If only we knew of a machine that could be trained to relentlessly fight any duplication ban, as Knight said, which will applied can slightly tweak the digital artwork in the back end, making it hard for AI model to train themselves on. To first prevent misuse of our social media images, and second, alert consumer when they come across an AI altered media. A simple Google search on how the tech world is combating deepfakes with AI lands many fascinating results, like Intel's deepfake detectors called fake catchers, which is said to spot blood flow in in the pixel of a video, measures how much light is absorbed or reflected by blood vessels to detect deepfakes. There have been other notable measures in providing transparency in the use of AI, like the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity C2PA, and open technical standards created by the coming together of many software companies with an aim to authenticate digital pictures. We must not forget that in the aforementioned deepfakes, we must not forget that the Affirmation deepfake controversy. There were two victims, Rashmika Mandana and Jara Patel. It is no news that actor and social media influencer, particularly women and other marginalized genders, are forced to face the brunt of deepfakes and other cyber crimes, and there is no support system in the place to guide them. Even if not for personal attacks, the recent held Hollywood strikes have proven that Indian cinema lacks a national union like SAG, AFTR, SAG-AFTRA, the Union for Hollywood actors to take a stand against the potential use or abuse of AI by studios that can threaten the livelihood of actors. Simran agrees as well. The bad side of AI is really nasty, but the good side is that we all know about the worst side of it. For now, there is little can we can do other than be aware of new AI tech and measures to combat dark AI and let legislature and human-friendly AI models do their jobs. The next MGNREGS audits cross 50% local bodies in just 6 states. Of the 34 states and union territories, only 6 have completed social audits of work done under the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme MGNREGS in more than 50% of Gram Panchayat, and Kerala is the only state to cover 100% Gram Panchayats. High rate of corruption is one of the primary complaints against the scheme, and social audit is the inbuilt anti-corruption mechanism in the act. These numbers are sourced from the magnet management information system on social audit maintained by the Union Ministry of Rural Development as on November 10. Section 17 of the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act MGNREGA says the Gram Sabha shall monitor the execution of works. Each state has a social audit until unit which are supposed to work independent of the implementing authorities. The auditing standards laid down by the Comptroller and Auditor General were issued only on December 19, 2016. Under these, every social audit unit is entitled to fund equivalent to 0.5% of the MGNREGA expenditure incurred by the state in the previous year. The audit involves quality checks of infrastructure created under the MGNREGA and checking for financial misappropriation in wages and procedural deviation. Other than Kerala, the states to cross the 50% mark are Bihar 60.64.4%, Gujarat 58.8%, Jammu and Kashmir 64.1%, Odisha 60.42%, and Uttar Pradesh 54.97%. Only three states have covered 40% or more villages: Telangana 40.5%, Himachal Pradesh 45.32%, and Andhra Pradesh 49.7%. Uniform problem. Other than Telangana, among the poll-bound states, the numbers are really low. Madhya Pradesh 1.73%, Mizoram 17.5%, Chhattisgarh 25.06%, and Rajasthan 34.74%. The problem is uniform irrespective of the party in power across the country. The center has multiple times he reminded the states that if the social audits are not conducted regularly, then the funds under MGNREGA will be withheld. The states complain that the audit is delayed because of the center does not release the fund for social audit units which are independent of the state government in the time. There is recurrent complaints of the delayed salaries for the village level auditors of Kerala. Kerala's Rural Development Minister M. B. Rajesh said it was the only state that also hold periodic social audits hearings at the panchayat level to subject the audit reports to close public scrutiny. In the other states, such public scrutiny is done only at the block level. We have taken a host of measures to to make our social audit mechanism robust, including holding periodic panchayat levels public hearings where all stakeholders participate. And anyway, Kerala has a healthy culture of people participation in government governance, said Minister Rajesh. Then next है Fatima Bivi, first woman judge in Supreme Court, dead. Almost everything is in the remarkable career of Justice M. Fatima Bivi, who died here at the age of 96, was a first. In 1950, she was the first student to complete a degree in law with full marks in all subjects, and 8 years later, she emerged first in competitive exam conducted by the Public Service Commission and joined the judicial services as a judicial service. Sorry. First in a competitor exam conducted Public Service Commission and joined the judicial services as a munsif. Years later, she became the first woman member of the country's income tax appellate tribunal, becoming before becoming the first Muslim woman to enter the higher judiciary as a judge in the Kerala High Court in 1983. Determined to recast the role of women in Indian judiciary, she then went on to become the first woman judge in the Supreme Court of India. 6 years later, Fatima Bibi was born to Anavitil Miran Sahib and Khadija Bibi of Patana Mithia in 1927. She completed her schooling at the Catholic at high school and did an undergraduate degree in chemistry from the University College Thiruvananthapuram. In line with her father's aspiration to make her a lawyer, she did a degree in law and enrolled as a lawyer in November 1950. She was the governor of Tamil Nadu from 1997 to 2001, and her most controversial decision was to administer the oath of office and secrecy to former Chief Minister Jayalalitha within hours of AIDMK securing a majority in the assembly election in May 2001. Jayalalitha has suffered disqualification from contesting election that year and on account of her conviction in two Tansi land deal sieges. In September that year, the Supreme Court unseated Jayalalitha. Fatima Bivi's tenure ended abruptly in a couple of months after the swearing-in of the AIDMK leader following the midnight arrest of then DMK President M. Karunanidhi in a corruption case. The center was displeased with the report submitted by her. Then studying sea ice amid penguins and the southern lights. It is unlike any workspace in the world. Each day starts off with a frigid, record low temperature. In the Antarctic, everything depends on weather. If the weather is good, we head out, else we stay in, says polar researcher Vishnu Nandan. As he settles down reluctantly to the temperature climate of his hometown, Thiruvananthapuram in Kerala after a 40 hours flight from Antarctica. It is not warm enough here, he says, or maybe now I have been so used to the cold that this is not warm enough. He adds quickly as an afterthought. Vishnu has just returned from an 8 month Odysseus in the Antarctic. He was one of the two scientists who were part of the 25-member team of the British Antarctic Survey, braving the extreme weather and the polar darkness at the Rothera Research Station on Adelaide Island. Was Antarctica as part of a scientific research survey? The research is a part of a UK-based project called DEFANT, drivers and effect of fluctuations in sea ice in the Antarctic, which set up a ground-based radar system to take measurement of sea ice. A research scientist at the University of Calgary and the University of Manitoba in Canada, Vishnu has his expertise in sea ice, frozen seawater that floats on the ocean surface. His work involves measuring the thickness of sea ice using the ground-based radar-based system on and correcting the errors in the measurement of same obtained from radar satellites. As part of the research, Vishnu along with the satellites as part of the research, Vishnu along with satellite Robbie Mallet installed a US-made instrument on owned by University of Manitoba on the sea ice to take the measurement. The thickness of the sea ice is measured using the satellite radar is prone to error. We cannot determine how thick the sea ice really is through this method because sea ice keeps drifting and it is not easy to keep track of its movement using satellite. Also, snow forms a layer over the ice with the prevalence of snow. We could overestimate the thickness when measurements are taken using satellite radars. This is very crucial because we might be under the impression that the sea ice is thicker than it really is. This could impact the policies we come up with to tackle climate change, says Vishnu. Climate concerns the Antarctic can be challenging to conduct field measurement of sea ice, says Vishnu, explaining that the snow is very thick and deep. It floats the ice into the ocean and becomes slushy. It is more salty and is not homogeneous when compared to that it in the Arctic. So there are combined errors from different sources. He says of the 8 months they spent in the Antarctic, he says the team could take readings on only 22 days. The rest of the days there was no sea ice in the areas where their ground-based radar system was mounted. This year recorded the worst sea ice ever and the lowest since 1976. He says researchers found that the sea ice area is almost 1 million square kilometer less than the previous lowest, which was in 1986, a real climate concern. The highest thickest thickness of sea ice measured by us was 44 centimeter, which is low. It can ideally go up to 1.5 meters or more. He says. So why do we need the sea ice if you do not have sea ice? A lot of the solar heat gets absorbed by the ocean instead of being reflected by the sea ice. This will lead to polar ocean getting warmer and other ocean also getting warmer, causing extreme weather scenarios. Further, the wildlife in the poles also needs a sea ice to survive, he says. Vishnu says the climate change is very evident in poles. The weather is not as cold as it used to be. This has been observed both in Arctic and Antarctic. It has also brought in a lot of challenges to do science. I honestly hope that people value more about how climate and environment are changing and protect it in ways they can, he said. He adds that life in the poles can be very rewarding when not working. The team can go for climbing, diving into the ocean and skiing, or just contemplate life amid penguins and the southern lights. But the downside can be equally stressful, with the isolation and the cold taking a toll on one's mental and physical health. I think isolation and loneliness are perhaps the biggest challenges when you are out in the poles. You are away from your friends and family, and that takes a toll on you. I have seen people get injured or their moods fluctuate. Teamwork is always challenge here, says Vishnu, who has spent 1000 plus days to all together in the Arctic and Antarctic. There is no sun for 6 months. I have become addicted to darkness, silence, and isolation. But that aside, I am very happy, humbled, and lucky to be able to do this. As many profession, every day is a new challenge, and you have to think on your feet, adapt, and be flexible. He says, adding with a chuckle, and I have one an office with a view. The next article need a regulator like SEBI for AI. India will involve the norms for regulating artificial intelligence and AI regulator could function like financial regulator SEBI, Prime Minister Economic Advisor Council PMEAC member Sanjeev Sanyal said on Thursday, stating that the model of self-regulation and bureaucratic regulation is unlikely to work in the AI space. Mr. Sanyal suggested that India could think of having a regulator that understands the technology and pays attention to how it is evolving. You need to create the equivalent of SEBI for AI system. You need a regulator who understands the technology and instead of wasting time predicting where it will go pays attention to how it is evolving. Mr. Sanel said for regulating AI systems has to be put in place. You need manual oversight just like circuit breakers in the financial market. He adds, you need a skin in the game and ex ante accountability just like you have boards in companies who are accountable. You need to make sure that AI and its behavior and ex ante you create skin in the game. You have to enforce regular audits just like you need to explain business models and accounts. You need to explain what AI is doing, he said. Mr. Sanel said all of these things have parallel in the financial world and this can be applied to the AI evolution and accordingly regulated. Asked how soon the regulation could come into force, he said it regulatory norms will evolve. It will happen reasonably fast. Once we begin to think along with those lines, we will need a good protocol on developing AI regulation, he said, adding that more sensible people feel that some regulation for AI is needed. देन आज का लास्ट आर्टिकल जो है एल एन टी फाइनेंस साइंस फाइनेंसिंग pact with Asian Development Bank for $125 million to support rural borrowers. L&T Finance, a non-banking financial company (NBFC), said it has signed a financing agreement with Asian Development Bank for $125 million to support financing, particularly for women borrowers in rural and peri-urban areas in India. The funding company is a loan of up to $125 million from ADB and an agreement to syndicate an additional $125 million co-fit financing from other development partners. At least 40% of the proceeds is allocated for women borrowers, while the rest will support farmers, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, as well as loans to purchase new two-wheeled vehicles. This collaboration will with ADB aligns with our core value of social responsibility, said Sachin Joshi, Group Chief Financial Officer, L&T Finance. We believe this partnership with ADB is a significant step and will boost our ongoing efforts of bridging the financial gap and promoting inclusive economic growth across the country, Mr. Joshi added. For our company, this long-term loan forms a part of our continuous strategy of diversifying our funding source. We recognize the deep impact of that financial inclusion has on the communities we serve in, and through our on-lending activities in the undeserved and lagging states in India, we pursue to be a catalyst for emp- empowering individuals, especially women farmers and MSME, thus fostering economic resilience. L&T Finance CFO emphasized. So this is all for today, friends, and we will meet from tomorrow onwards with new news articles from the Hindu newspaper. So till then, keep studying and thank you. Thanks a lot.